Welcome everybody. My name's Adam Smith. I'm the director of the Rothermere American Institute, which is where you now are. A very warm welcome to you all to Oxford, to the REI. The REI is Oxford's Centre for the Study of America and its place in the world. We're an interdisciplinary centre, politics, history, literature, and anything else that comes along. We exist to kind of bring together a conversation about the significance of America and its global position, where it's come from and where it's going. Much of this building, and you're very welcome to explore it when you get a chance, much of this building is the Bodleian Library's holdings in American history, but the Institute has grown up around it, and we now support a fantastic community of postgraduate students and visiting fellows and distinguished visiting professors as well. And many of our graduate students, I'm pleased to say, are here with us. But it's a very great privilege and pleasure for us to welcome you here and to work with the Bradamas Centre to put on this exciting event over the next 2 days. So I hope you enjoy being in Oxford and enjoy these conversations, as I certainly intend to. And I'm now going to hand over to Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you. You can see why we're just delighted to be here already. And thank you so much, Adam, for the gracious welcome and your help and support in putting this together. Hannah and your team have been terrific to work with. And I'm just going to give a little background on the Bradamas Center and the context for the next 2 days, and then we'll turn it right over to, you see how anxious they are? They're ready to go and do battle. The Bradamas Center at New York University is named after John Bradamas, who was a member of the United States Congress for over 20 years, and then president of NYU. And while he was still, the latter years of his presidency, we created the center to carry on work he cared about. His main interests were in legislatively, and then also as president, were education, arts, culture, and conducting those dialogues in two important ways, well, those three dialogues. One, bringing together thinkers and doers. This was John's phrase. It's not just the theoreticians, it's not just the practitioners, it's when you mesh the two that you get the rich insights. And secondly, perhaps even at a higher premium now than when the Bradamas Center was created, that one conduct that dialogue in a civic manner and civil manner. So our aim here is usually to shed light, but we generate a little heat, and that's okay because it keeps everyone warm and on their toes. You notice who I'm pointing to on the heat scale. And this is quite a group of thinkers and doers we've brought together. We've been doing this for 15 years. So in one sense, they have their act together in many, many ways. But it's a group that both represent both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans. They work as campaign strategists, communication experts, journalists, pundits, if we call them that, some. But they know their business. They really know how to bring their expertise to bear on what you might look out on the cacophony of American politics now, right? And say, someone help me make sense of this. And so I'll turn it right over now to the people who can make sense of this, or at least somewhat. And we certainly meet at a frothy time, if that's the right word, in American politics. I'll leave it at that. And so I think we'll find this particularly an engaging set of panels. 3 panels today, so we have to go lickety-split, and leave time for questions and answers because we've got real live students here, which is a real treat. And so thank you for joining us. And Hannah tells me over 200 have signed up on Zoom. All right, so you have an audience. Take it away, Eugene.
Thank you, thank you. I can't promise that we'll make sense of American politics, but we sure will try, because a lot doesn't feel like it makes sense at this point. This is Sleepers and Surprises. Is a Trump v. Biden matchup inevitable? My name is Eugene Daniels. I'm a reporter. I'm the one nonpartisan up here. I'm a journalist at Politico. I cover the White House and write our newsletter Playbook, which many of the people that came with us have been reading and been helping to give information for a very long time. Next to me is Jarrod Agen. Jarrod, I'm going to try to keep out the years, not to age anyone up here, but many years of politics and communication.
There were 2 years at the White House that aged me a lot.
That's what happens. 6 months would, exactly. He served as the Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Communications for Vice President Mike Pence, worked under George W. Bush, Deputy Press Secretary and Associate Director of Strategic Communications at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. John Anzalone on the end over there is one of the nation's top pollsters. Maybe Joel and him will fight over that title here in a little bit. Has polled for the past 4 presidential races, most recently obviously serving as kind of the main pollster for the Joe Biden 2020 campaign. Polled for the campaigns of President Barack Obama, 2008 and 2012, Hillary Clinton in 2016, and has helped multiple senators, governors, dozens of members of Congress, and all types of people kind of understand what the American people are thinking and feeling. Next to him is Rob Collins, founder and CEO of Coin, credit card company for conservatives in spring of 2022, veteran strategist and former founding partner at S3 Public Affairs. He was brought in by the Trump administration to kind of quarterback the Neil Gorsuch, bipartisan nomination for Neil Gorsuch, which, when that happens, it means you know what you're doing when they try to bring you in for the Supreme Court. Was also the executive director of the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee and helped re-elect 12 incumbents and 12 new Republicans at that time. And finally, Kiki McLean, a veteran of 6 presidential campaigns, including the Clinton-Gore campaign, served as senior advisor to Hillary Clinton for her presidency in 2008. Served as
presidential campaign, not presidency.
President, yes. Things will look a little different in America.
Sorry,
That happen.
it seemed important.
Yeah. And served as spokesperson and led communications for Vice President Al Gore, Joe Lieberman, the senator, and Democratic National Committee, and current treasurer of the Democratic Governors Association. First of all, can I get a show of hands up here that thinks the Biden-Trump rematch is not inevitable? Not inevitable. Okay, we have one. Thank you. I was hoping that one person. Are there people here that think it's not inevitable? That we might have. Okay, we have Hitch.
All the way up. If you believe it, put it up.
Yeah, if you really
up.
believe it, put your hands.
Believe
Okay,
it.
perfect.
He did.
Well then,
Jody? No,
halfway.
you didn't. Yeah.
You got to believe it. Jarrod, I want to start with you because a lot of this feels like a question largely about the Republican Party. Your old boss is running, he's struggling. Everyone not named Trump is kind of struggling. It took me exactly 4 minutes to say that name. So you guys will hear that a lot. His hold on the Republican Party looks stronger every single day. Are there any of these candidates even looking like they have a shot at having a shot?
Yeah, I think it's less about these candidates because I know all of them, work with a lot of them, and have a lot of respect for all of them. I think, honestly, the Republican primary ended the day that Donald Trump was indicted in New York. And I think if you look back a year ago when we were together, all of these candidates were pulling together their campaigns, starting to raise money, building the infrastructure, and everybody knew that these indictments, they didn't know exactly what they'd be, but they knew that these indictments were looming. And so everyone was kind of vying to be that one person that could, rise once the indictments became this wild card in the race. And what ended up happening was they were a wild card in the race, but they were very much a wild card all in the side of Trump. And you look at how that first one went down, every station covers the motorcade up to the courthouse. Everything's dominated that whole day. A press conference at night, speech at night, whatever fundraising goes out, poll numbers go up. At that moment in New York was the beginning of it, and then we just saw it repeated 4, maybe 5 times, and each time solidified Trump even stronger to the point where within the Republican Party. Now, I'm just talking about on the primary side here, not the general. It's now a movement. There is by the time we got to the mugshot being released, there is no 10-point policy plan that one of these other candidates is going to put out, that voter out there is going to say, I read that 10-point plan, and that's better than this guy who they're trying to put in jail for 500 years, who I've already voted for twice. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's less about what these other candidates have done. If they really wanted the chance, and this is completely in hindsight, it's nothing against, nobody would have known this, but it should have been consolidated back then.
Earlier.
And I just don't think there's any runway left, because I think that train has left the station at this point.
When they put a mugshot on his T-shirt and people at the Trump rally started saying, he's just like Tupac, I was like, oh, this feels a little different. I don't know about Tupac. I don't know how Tupac would feel about that. Rob, you raised your hand and said that you don't think it's inevitable. Right. Is that a Trump question or a Biden question for you?
That's awesome. Thank you for thank you.
That up for you.
Everyone in here in a lot of trouble, so I can write a story.
Thank you. No, thank you for
This is on the record.
highlighting the other side's problems. We'll get to that in a second. But let's focus on the Republicans right now. Right now the most favorable Republican in the country is Tim Scott. He has favorables that mirror two other insurgent campaigns, Reagan and Obama, that he has high favorabilities against entrenched incumbents. I think if we were to look back at both Republican primaries and Democratic primaries, if we took this panel back to, forgive me for the years, but 07, I think this panel would say, well, Hillary Clinton's a lock, isn't it?
That's right.
So I think if we just spent $10 million on positive ads in the states to try and raise Tim's name ID, and he's the youngest candidate of the top tier, except for Vivek. But he has, the great financial structure, a great message, and I think, he will have his moment. And I think if he can consolidate the field, and when I say consolidate, I don't mean there won't be zombie candidates floating around still running, hoping to, get their spark. But if we can consolidate the field, Trump's ceiling is roughly 40% in the primary states. If Tim can do well in Iowa, New Hampshire, and then go home to South Carolina and win, I think there will be a thunderous amount of support, both institutional but also financial, that will find him, and he'll go into South Carolina on Super Tuesday. The challenge you have with a candidate with universal name ID in Trump is you look at California, it's 13% of the election for the Republican primary. So you do have to build it fast. We had a plan to build up Tim's name ID and then hope the field consolidated after Labor Day. That's not going to happen. So now we are just playing for a momentum play, and I think he'll catch. And, Trump is not inevitable. Well, arguably Biden is neither. I mean, both of them have a lot of problems structurally if you look at their perception and the reasons why people are voting for them. But this is a weird election that we probably have. He's almost like an incumbent candidate we're running against, and that's the challenge.
I'm going to push back a little bit. This is the reporter in me. Sorry, everyone. But, Tim Scott, my colleagues at Politico, had a story just this Sunday that even the people who love Tim Scott, you have Mark Sanford, who was there when he announced, the former governor of South Carolina, John Cornyn, senator in Texas, who loved him and said that he loved him, and that he was a great messenger. But the issue that Tim Scott has had is on the debate stage, and when he's had the most eyes on him, is there's not been, he's not broken through. He hasn't tried, and he has kind of stayed in the background. He's changing his strategic kind of get out there and get in front of a camera message just a little bit. He's doing a lot more interviews. But some folks think that is too little, too late. Is he the person in your eyes that, obviously, that you think is the only one that has a chance? Even in South Carolina, Nikki Haley just got the endorsement of the largest newspaper in the state.
Yeah, I mean, the other candidates have an authenticity gap in their story, which is they all begged Trump for a job, now they say they hate him. Tim Scott never had that, doesn't have that problem. Like I said, his favorables are plus 35 over the field. And he would say he did not come to the first debate, but the growth between the first debate and the second debate was significant if you look at him evolving. Senators have always had trouble kind of running for a national office out of the Senate because it's hard to get their brains out of the Senate floor. Obama did it because he'd only been a senator for 100 days when he announced, so he hadn't spent, It's true. and spend 40 years and then decide to run. Yeah. So I think Tim is evolving, and I think his message has gotten a lot sharper. He's doing a lot more innovative and interesting stuff. He's run the most heavily policy-focused campaign, and ideas still matter, and they do. They do.
Kiki, the Democratic side of this seems pretty sewn up. Rob just talked about, there being structural issues for Biden, so if you would like to address that, please feel free. But there continues to be grumblings of the how we got to this point, right, about with Biden. No incumbent kind of cares about that. There are people who, still to this day that I talk to, wanted some kind of primary, even a primary in name only. But there are quite a few that continue to say, I'm good on Biden. There's the age question. There's the, does he fit in with the loudest folks in the Democratic Party? How do you think they've handled his kind of perception issues, those structural issues that Rob was talking about?
Well, first, let's set a base of understanding on a few things. So we all raised our hands in answer to your question. There are a few things riskier than Vegas and the new online betting system, except a presidential primary, right? So when we answer the question, we're answering it for today.
Yes.
Based on what we know
Right.
today, okay? Because to Rob's point, we've all had those moments in our career and they turn on a dime, right? Most of the time, conventional wisdom turns out to be where it is. There might be surprising moments. And I would say to you today, in my humble opinion, with the exception of two in the Republican primary, namely Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, I actually believe the country would be better off with anybody else in that Republican primary, with the exception of Joe Biden. And the reality is there are people who've considered challenging President Biden and made decisions already to get out of a Democratic primary. Now, we may have somebody new getting in later this week. There are reports of that. And it remains to be seen how successful they'll be.
Dean Phillips, congressman from New Hampshire,
who is considering getting in. Having been somebody who's lived through a few recounts and races that are cutting this close, any participation by a third party or the suppression in a primary can hinder an incumbent, or somebody who receives a nomination through an active primary can hinder their performance in a general, and it can be a game changer. And not a blowout game changer, but a death by 1,000 cuts game changer. And that is a challenge for us. And that's why things like the No Labels challenge, and I say this as an original founder of No Labels, and now a vocal opponent of No Labels effort today on that, because I think it's dangerous.
No Labels?
No Labels is an organization that was founded 15 years ago in an effort to bring a more moderate conversation to the participation and the effort of Congress and how to behave, and the promotion of congressional reforms. And you had the birth of the Problem Solvers Caucus and an effort to reform how Congress behaved. And that's you had great results. That's how you had the benefit of some of the great passage of legislation with President Biden and some of his most successful efforts, because the work of the Problem Solvers and a group of senators from both sides of the aisle. It was not ever meant to go and behave as it is behaving now, with the threat of a third-party candidacy of unnamed candidates, by the way, and behaving the way it is behaving by creating ballot access and not following legal rules of how you gain ballot access. So we might do a whole panel on No Labels, but it's already petitioned to get on the ballot and has already done so in several states. And early polling this summer indicates that in most states it would benefit President Trump if it put unnamed candidates on, right? And I'll let people like Mr. Anzalone and Mr. Benenson speak to you, and I have numbers I'm happy to share with anybody later what some of that polling showed, but in 5 of the key states it demonstrates it would benefit Trump and not President Biden. And I think that would be a flaw. And in fact, the chief political scientist, who's well regarded on both sides of the party, who helped No Labels design the congressional reforms for 15 years, left No Labels because he felt so strongly that this was the wrong thing for them to do and the wrong place for them to be. But back to what this means with President Biden, we have a new structure in the primaries moving forward, right? And in terms of the calendar and what that does, that may say something for the enthusiasm and the case he makes for developing momentum going into the general election. And it also will have something to do with how, and I think you're already beginning to see him, and John can tell us more about that, how he begins to develop the dialogue with the Republican nominee. And I believe he's already begun to do that with Donald Trump. But here's the newest factor we have now. We've spent the summer talking about Bidenomics and whether that's working for him or not, and whether that's working for the American people or not.
And what it means.
And what it
And
means.
actually what it is.
What it means? Well, I think we can see what it means. We can see the economy is growing, and we can see that we have job creation. We can see that the rate of inflation is coming down, and we can see that it's working. I think the American people have been through a lot, and emotionally the American people may not have felt it, even though they may be experiencing it in their wallet. And it's a long time to be able to feel that experience. But we're a country who is experiencing the war of our allies right now. And that's a big challenge to a presidency. And I believe we have a president who is capable of leading us through that moment and leading us as a country to be the ally that we need to be in this country. And that brings another dimension to what a president is. And I think that's an important conversation that we're going to experience this fall going into the primaries.
Yeah. John, to the reporters, for us, and probably a lot of people, we see as kind of like the Biden pollster and kind of like the Biden whisper. We know that, I don't think I'm breaking any rules here, that you guys are still in contact, and you came on the Political Playbook podcast with my colleague Ryan before the 2022 midterms and kind of talked us through kind of that world. But I'm really curious about kind of, to Kiki's point about the excitement within the Democratic Party. Most Democrats don't seem to want Joe Biden to run. That seems to be over. When you look at polling, that answer seems to be answered. How do you think that impacts turnout, right? The excitement now and going into the actual general, and how that might impact turnout?
Well, I think that you have to step back, right? I mean, like, we could literally have a conversation 1 year from now, right?
And we will.
We will before the election. Well, we usually do that after the election.
Yes.
And things can be completely changed,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at the end of the day, we probably have these two, maybe we won't. But at the end of the day, these things become about contrast, right? And we had a 2016 election that was decided by 75,000 people in 3 states. We had a 2020 election decided by 75,000 people in 3 states. 2 of those states were different. Guess what? In 2024, we're probably going to have a really close election because we're a super divided country. And it doesn't matter about the 91 indictments yet, right? But it is about contrast. And the fact is that the Republicans will have you believe that the indictments don't matter, that he only got stronger within the Republican Party, which he did. That's what happens in a cult environment. And I don't say that as like some smart ass. I just think that is how we should view it. But in a general election, the fact is, it is about contrast. I'll go back to Kiki. When we're in the middle of trials in 2024, we've been through 20 events where everyone would say, oh, that's going to kill Trump. The McCain quote, the bus quote. I can go on and on and on. But what we have learned in a campaign is that when you get close, it becomes a risk assessment, right? Joel and I saw this in 2016. Trump became the big risk until Comey walked out of there and did another investigation, and she became a risk. And so they went with the new guy. And so my point being is that we keep wanting to say none of these things ever matter with Trump. Well, let's wait until 2024 when the trials really happen, and people have to think about this, right? And maybe it won't matter, maybe it will matter. The other thing I think about contrast is that, again, people always want to talk about whether it's Biden's age or the vulnerabilities, et cetera. We never see a lot of reporting on his strengths, given, for example, his last 2 speeches on Israel. Like these are the times when people might say, I believe, that, oh, okay, glad he's president. And so I think that they do matter, right? Enthusiasm. Eugene, we go through this every cycle. Democrats have a lower enthusiasm rate than Republicans until they have the same enthusiasm rate with Republicans right after Labor Day of the election year, right? And so I don't think it as much as an enthusiasm problem or a GOTV problem. When you've won or lost elections by 75,000 votes in 3 states and 45,000 votes in 3 states. All of a sudden, you can't be thinking about this is just base. You can't be worrying just about your base. You have to think of everyone, every demographic, as a persuadable voter, because we won by 45,000 votes. And yes, there's going to be, we're only going to play in these states, or you're only going to play in those states if you're a Republican, et cetera. But the fact is that you're going to take your strengths and you're going to take your contrasts and you're going to put them in the melting pot. And this race won't look like 2020. It just won't.
Right.
I mean, it's just not. I mean, we have a president who has something to run on. We know the American public doesn't necessarily know it, and there's a block there. But guess what? Same thing happened with Barack Obama, if you look at the reelect. Same thing happened with Trump at the reelect. In modern presidencies, presidents get their message and agenda and accomplishments out by spending $1 billion in a campaign, because we have a diffused system of how people digest media. And that's what we're going to see come 2024.
But I'm going to
Yes,
add,
please do.
But this cycle, different names, different games, except on the ballot this time because of no labels. In that algebra, at the campaign headquarters, we will have to pay attention to Cornel West, to Robert Kennedy, and to no labels, if no labels goes forward in April in Dallas, which, by the way, even if they don't, the amount of energy they are putting into the space, there has to be an equal amount of energy to educate people who they are and what they're doing to pull that back.
And they have to get on the ballots.
And
in
they-
those
and they're
states.
having
People
success.
have to understand.
They are
how
having success.
Yes, no labels is.
So do not
Right.
diminish that. They're
No-
having success.
No labels is. It's very difficult.
I kind of look at it, if just take today, there's that scene in Avengers Endgame where Iron Man turns to Doctor Strange and says, how many of the scenarios do we win? And Doctor Strange says, I've gone through 80 million of them, and we only win in one.
Yeah.
And I feel like right now we are living in the one scenario
Yeah.
where Donald Trump wins. And
Talk me through that.
What does
if
that mean? That means you win?
if Donald Trump, yeah, because of what you're saying, what you're saying. I mean, there are a lot of things. The third party candidates, the economy, the unrest all over the world. I mean, all of these things. John's point is exactly right. There is a lot to play out all of next year. But if Trump starts to, I feel like next year is going to turn into a courtroom drama. The campaign, it's not going to be a campaign. It's going to be, there's press releases.
Courtroom TV?
Yeah, yes.
Law and
it's-
order.
Right.
Law and
But
order, general election.
Press releases
edition.
are now replaced by legal briefs and filings, and that's what drives news coverage. And I think that's what will play out next year. Now, so there's a ton to play out, but if Trump starts winning these small victories, I'm not saying like things get thrown out, but cases get punted further down the road, minor victories in these courthouses, all of this helps his argument. And that's really what's going to drive the news cycle all next year, are these courtroom victories.
Rob, I want to pull you in on the courtroom aspect of this, because what we've seen recently, Sidney Powell, another person that was a co-defendant of Trump's in Georgia, have flipped and will now be having to work with the state of Georgia against Donald Trump. We'll find out about the fake elector scheme, which Cheeseborough was a part of. We'll find out more information about who let Sidney Powell in the White House to talk about the Kraken in front of the president in the Oval Office before folks were able to get in there and stop that. Could you foresee a world where these legal issues, as they start to seem worse for Trump, right? So you don't want Sidney Powell talking to the attorneys general and anyone in charge of the legal process when you're Donald Trump. Could you see a world where that could force maybe Republicans to turn their back against Trump sometime if this happens during the primary?
I mean, I think that's the case for Tim Scott or anyone else beating Trump, which is you have a lot of people running as the, facsimile of Trump. I'm Trump but competent. I'm Trump but fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And I think, if given a choice between, Coke like we had for lunch and some watery version of, you're going to take Coke. And I think that's why we haven't seen the escape velocity Ron DeSantis. You know, the experts said clear the field for Ron, he's going to run and impeach Trump. That didn't happen. Now they're saying clear the field for Nikki because she's going to run him. But I think if a candidate can emerge that is an alternative to the drama around Trump, but can provide the same kind of, I mean, for all the fury and sound, Trump wasn't radically different as a Republican president than his predecessors. A lot of the stuff, he was much more effective in some ways, and
Tweeted more.
but yeah, I mean,
That's the drama and the fury.
yeah, that's the
It's the chaos.
the chaos.
It's really his biggest impediment is the chaos. I mean, his problem is that, you know, 58% of America liked his agenda, and he underperforms his job rating because people don't want to go back to the chaos.
So your argument, I just want to ask.
But that's a general election argument.
Yeah.
And my argument, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did. But I just want to go to what Jarrod said. It's like, again, when the trials happen, even if he wins, it puts it on the news. Interestingly enough, people poo-pooed the January 6th commission things. They should have been they should have been in prime time because it was some of Biden's best numbers. It reminded people, and they did learn new things, and they will learn new things. And again, when you're winning by 75 and 45, you don't have to peel too many people away, or you don't have to peel too many Republicans away to vote third party. And so it's another thing when it becomes reality. And then people will make a risk assessment. And risk assessments are not a good thing to happen in the election year of 2024. It's nothing in 2023. It's all hypothetical at that point.
But what I hear John and Rob saying, because I'd like to be the bipartisan spokesperson who represents them both, is, I mean, the Clinton-Obama race represents a similar form of that, not as dramatic. I'm not comparing Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump, so don't go there, people. But that, and there were other historic factors in Obama, and I'm not diminishing that.
The Iraq War
But
was a really big deal.
But the concept of, at a certain point, there was a dramatic function in that primary. Your point on Tim Scott, you would not argue that Nikki, but I would say that Nikki could be a case of that, of Nikki Haley coming in and saying, not in the primary, not that drama, we'll go with one of these, right? It's not a repudiation of his politics, but we don't want the drama. We can have that same agenda without, we can have the leadership without the drama, or in the general election, we could have that without the drama, right?
I mean, we have the most beatable president in probably modern electoral history right now. Do we want to waste our vote, waste this opportunity on a candidate who possibly could have real or at least public relations nightmares coming all the way through, and it's about that candidate? Or is there somebody who's going to have these popular policies, which resonate across the party spectrum, but also into moderate and even swing voters, but just is a fresh face, is a new face? And I think that's the moment we're all waiting for. And these things, like Hillary Clinton, like other powerful things, they look unbeatable until they're beaten.
Right, right.
And
Until it ain't.
yeah, and right now everyone always looks at a candidate and says, well, this is what they are right now, and they're not watching the evolution. And I think that'll be the fun part of it.
And see, what I would say about President Biden is that at the beginning of the cycle, so to speak, as everybody looks up and says, Joe Biden shouldn't run, and President Biden shouldn't run, and well, he's too old, or well, you know, he's just not popular, and well, the numbers, and No Labels looks up and says, well, when we say, do you want any of these politicians to run, everybody says, no, we hate all politicians, right? And then as time goes on, people say, wow, we didn't get into a recession, and wow, look at that, they're fixing the roads, and wow, unemployment has, jobs are created, and wow, the economy's getting better, and we have a lot going on in the world, and wow, we have international conflict, and we happen to have this guy who's an expert in it, can do it, and as time has gone on, to your point, Eugene, Democrats have gotten better with it, and they're okay, and they're like, yeah, this is where we should be, and I think as we go further into the cycle, people will get better with him, and so I think the trajectory for Biden gets up. It's not a day at the candy shop, so don't
Yeah,
worry,
yeah.
John.
No, I
I'm
get that.
not, I'm not smoking the crack,
But
I'm saying it's settled.
It's the
some.
wrong diagnostic. The fact is that Biden still gets 90% of all Dems when you do a head-to-head.
But my point is,
right.
it's become calmer.
Right.
So we have a better chance to make the case.
But the fact
Fighting
is,
his own pollster?
no. Because I think that
help you
how the media often will report on polling is a huge problem, right? Because again, he's running. He's announced he's running, et cetera, et cetera. The fact is that in a head-to-head, he consolidates Democrats fairly well, and it's early, and will consolidate them more, right? I mean, you can sit there and nitpick demographics, right? Yeah. I mean, for example, you can say, well, he should be getting more African Americans. He's weak with African Americans. Well, let's back up here and analyze that for a second. In Georgia, you had Raphael Warnock, an African American sitting senator in Georgia. His opponent, Herschel Walker, African American hero in Georgia because of the University of Georgia football. You had Stacey Abrams, who almost picked off a governor's seat in 2008, running. So 3 out of the 4 major candidates were African American. African American turnout was the lowest since 2014. Okay, so right now, that's true. The share of vote. I mean, let's not debate that right now. It's pretty close to.
Hold on. No, see, this is Democrats.
Right. Okay, that's fine. But the
making
point,
great points.
my point, Karen, more importantly is that I was doing Whitmer in Detroit. It was down 9%, and if I could tell you how much money we spent trying, it should have been down another 1.5 if we hadn't done what we done. My point is, there's a structural problem. Maybe it's with Democrats. Maybe it's with America. But this isn't a Joe Biden problem with just African Americans. This is a structural voting problem.
Right.
You can do the same thing with young people, with Latinos, et cetera. And so I think we approach it the wrong way in terms of how we look at the polling, and we just say, oh, well, Joe Biden's not doing, that well with African Americans. No. Candidates aren't doing well with African Americans or Latinos or AAPI or young people or rural voters, et cetera. Every demographic right now is up for grabs. And here's another little secret. Every demographic is pissed off.
Yeah.
And I think
right?
my point was...
And that's why they're up for grabs.
I think my point was, I think in this election cycle, time is on Joe Biden's side.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's on Donald Trump's side. I think time is... And don't make the joke. I know where you're going, but I'm with you. I think time is not on Donald Trump's side, and time could be on somebody like Tim Scott or Nikki Haley's side.
Well, yeah, I would argue. I would agree with that. However, I would
You
say,
should just
He
stop
likes
there.
Tim Scott, if
Go
you
with
guys
that.
didn't know.
yes, I know it's been a great product placement. Has been really strong in all of our.
Can't find this kind of media buys.
But I think Biden is only going to get weaker. I mean, his narrative is only falling apart. I mean, if we
Which part of it? I'd
if
love
we
to hear
well
that.
and this is the great thing about knowing John is I would say, as a nominee, Tim Scott could take the last winning presidential campaign's narrative, which is this is a madman who will get us into world wars, crash the economy, he's bad on immigration, and I would just run that right back at the president, which is, we had a very quiet Middle East where Saudi Arabia and Israel were getting
He's
along.
a madman?
Well, that was the talking point, is that Trump was a madman.
Joe Biden's a madman.
Well, he was going to get us into world wars. We have 2 wars with Joe Biden. We have runaway inflation. If you're a homeowner, if you're making under $80,000, you feel the bite. You have an administration that couldn't figure out a baby formula shortage, real life consequences. When you ask Americans, what's your number one concern? It's inflation. When you dig underneath those numbers, what about inflation are you most worried about? Energy prices and housing prices have been flip-flopping all for the past 2 years under Joe Biden. You look at the immigration policy, which is the number 2 issue for voters right now.
Republicans.
No,
that's
moderate too.
Listen.
It's a number 2 issue.
It's not a number 2 issue with.
And Senate Opportunity has been
good
polling
God.
this, and
You're
it's
reading Rick Scott polls.
Okay, that's not Rick
It's
Scott.
just like.
They don't want to talk about it, but Americans are concerned about immigration. 867 people died on the border
Here goes our
last
dinner
year.
tonight. It's all going to be slide decks.
And
Be uplifting. Rob, the Tim Scott stuff was uplifting. Like feeling good.
I know. See,
And then the Eeyore comes out.
here when you live in a hermetically sealed world, you're like, my president is perfect.
Yeah, and I'll counter
I'm
with Again, 2 incredible speeches with Israel. You sounded like Dole.
The last 10 days.
You
Okay.
sounded like Dole when he was VP,
It's
the
a
Democratic Wars. It was like ridiculous. So his Israel speeches, I'll take this. I'll take what he's done back in Israel. I'll take BIF. I'll take China.
but the Republican
no.
candidate will
I'll
be
take bringing the
lockstep with
supply
Biden
chain
on
back
Israel.
from China. I'll bring IRA. I'll take the VETS Act. I'll take all of the accomplishments against the EOR.
IRA
I'll just
is
telling
not
you.
being felt by the American people.
It won't be, but after $1 billion of what, I'll take $35 insulin, I'll take $2,000 caps on prescription drugs for Medicare, I'll take Medicare negotiation, I'll take being able to talk about what you've done for working families, seniors, and small businesses against chaos any day.
Against 8% home mortgages.
Fine, you do yours, we'll
Okay,
do
I'm
ours.
just- I'm just saying,
55%.
you're
We don't have
talking
time
about
for everybody to go through
micro-policies.
theirs.
Here's another
You're talking about
diagnostic.
micro policies. I'm saying the macro
I'm not.
economic, the macro international, and the macro border message is awful for the president.
Go for
Okay,
it.
okay.
You go for it, yeah.
I'm
That's
gonna
how
go
you beat
for it.
Trump.
No,
I'm just telling you, that was
it's
your
not how we
messaging.
beat Trump.
Yes, it
How
is.
we beat Trump was 80% of our ads were positive talking about Joe Biden's agenda. 80%.
Comparative.
All right, Eugene gets the panel
Sorry.
back.
Yeah, no. I'm enjoying this. I'm writing my playbook top for tomorrow, just based off this one conversation.
product
Exactly. We're all winning up here.
Jarrod is the lead.
If folks have questions, raise your hands, and I'm gonna keep going, but raise your hands and I'll come to you. One of the things that we were talking about when it came to Trump was that chaos and the drama was
Always, no matter whose family dinner table.
they all agree on that.
Always.
But that was his vulnerability. To me, and someone who's been, that goes and talks to voters, has been to these rallies, the Republican Party, the base of the Republican Party, that seems to be why they like him. That the chaos and drama, the flip the table, the don't be the same as the other guys, the Tim Scotts and Nikki Haley's, that is an appeal to Republicans. Jarrod, you haven't talked in a bit, so
Yeah, no, I mean, and certainly in the Republican primary, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm pulling us back to
There
the
is
primary,
there is a strong distrust in institutions, and they initially sent him to Washington to upend the institutions, and so all of that. Every time he challenges something, I mean, as John hinted at, we always would say, "Oh, there might, this is it. This is what the voters are going to turn on him." And it has never happened. And like you said, through the summer, we saw each indictment made him stronger in the in the primary. But again, this is him versus the institutions. And I do think the one thing that the Trump team has is he is going to be focused on this fight. This is the time where this is his strength and weakness is he's going to want to talk about this indictment battle every single day. And this is what he's going to be singularly focused on. That there'll be true socials on other topics, but this fight of me versus the institutions is Donald Trump's message for the next year.
he's won with that message before.
What if he's convicted in May? I mean, there's a 50% chance he's going to trial in May.
Just so our
He may be
viewers,
convicted of federal felonies and they may put his ass in jail.
so just so our viewers know, that question's asked by a former prosecutor.
Yeah.
sitting in the-
If you heard the prosecutorial question, that's why. Yeah.
Surely that affects, I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
I don't know what the constitutional answer is on that about whether he can actually be seated to the presidency.
It seems like he
not.
can. After
He can,
the
after it was
folks that I
actually
talked
looked
to,
into.
that he could, we don't know this, but that he could be president from jail? But go ahead.
But see, I wonder, like, I think
We've never tested this
Jarrod's
theory.
right about that, but there's a psychology that you find that's gone on. In 2016, it was like, let's vote for him because it just blows it up, right? And I got that. I understood that. You and I talked about that.
to hold the White House
Right. Well, but you and I talked about, like, just blow it up, both sides. We think it's a pox on everybody's house. Let's just get somebody, let's get a used car salesman. Let's just do it. Let's blow it all up. And there was something to that. Now there is an entrenchment in his supporters of, you can't tell me I'm wrong. Because to deny him would be to say, I was wrong about this, right? And there's something to be said for helping people find a respectable exit ramp. So like, think about all those Thanksgiving dinners that went south for the last 8 years. And people were yelling. And like, how do you give somebody a respectable way out, right?
Grandma brings out dessert.
without
is what
losing face, that that, you know, like when you had the girlfriend who dated the horrible person all that time, but they're embarrassed by it. But people have become really entrenched in this, okay? So that's a culture change. That's not a change of vote. That doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's why you see people digging in even harder. And they believe they're patriots. And he's a patriot. And he's being persecuted. And he's working that podium and that messaging, right? Which is why I think Nikki Haley did such a great job in those debates, because she was willing to stand up in a more forceful way, right, with her position. She was willing to look up at one of the other candidates and say, you are ridiculous and dumb, and you haven't done your homework, and sit down and hush up, you know? There was something about her willing to take a bigger control of the moment. So for people who want that, a little bit more of the rebel, even though she's not a rebel, she's a pretty traditional institutionalist within the party. But I think in the long haul, the question becomes, will there be a sliver of people for whom the chaos becomes too much, and in private and in secret in a primary, they might move over in their vote? And then the other thing I wonder, and I don't know the answer, and I would ask the two of you this, I don't think people really even get what's going on in the speakers. It's not even speaker's battle, it's lack of a speaker, right? Are there just some moderate or traditional conservative voters in the Republican Party who look up and say, oh yeah, we just can't have any of this anymore because our party can't even govern anymore. So
Jarrod, I want to get back to Cynthia's question, because if to you the legal battles have just made him stronger. If he is convicted in May, does that change things for some Republicans?
Primary, no. In the general,
in the general, yes.
Well, the primary will be over.
The primary will be over by that time. But do you see that being a Republicans be like, no, this is our guy, so we have to defend him, and so they just tighten their arms around him more, which I think is what Cynthia's asking.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Republican base who at that point had nominated him.
Have chosen
I
him.
think it's a very rough scenario to then have him go through and win primaries, and then in between the primary and the convention
would they see?
to switch him. I don't know
Would
the legal
would
answer.
delegates nominate him at a convention?
I don't know the answer. I mean, I don't know
would?
They could.
They could.
They could,
but
but
would they?
they could do it. They could do everything at the convention and they create an entire, like they used to do in the old days.
Can we talk about another byproduct of him being
Quickly.
convicted? And again, this is important because I don't know where Rob got it, but the number 2 issue on Americans' minds of who voted in 2022 in the congressional districts that were swing districts was democracy. And, we don't know what the byproduct of a conviction is, but we can guess that it could be very ugly, right? It could be violence, et cetera. And Biden gave this really interesting speech right at the end of 2022 that everyone kind of like, why is he talking about democracy? And it wound up being the number 2 issue that people were voting on. And I really think that, again, this is all about risk management and risk assessment. But I think that if we have a trial that convicts Trump, the byproduct of how hardcore Trumpers act and potentially violence and the threats to democracy will again potentially embolden not only Biden but the Democrats in how important that issue is. We don't talk about it a lot, quite frankly, but it is something that is seriously on the mind of people, and I think the conviction will bring that up.
Yeah. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
So a year ago when we were together, we asked the Republicans on this panel, is it going to be sufficient for a Republican to get nominated over Trump by going around Trump
Or through him?
and waiting or going through him? And I think both of you said you're going to have to ultimately go through him. And so the question becomes, will that happen, who and when? And right now, the only person that looks to me like they're trying to go through him is Chris Christie.
And Republican voters hate Chris Christie.
I don't know if that's open or not,
Hate
but
Chris Christie.
at some point, when someone has their moment, whether it's Mike Pence or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or whoever it is, are they going to try to go through him, or are they just going to wait to be anointed somehow?
Does Tim go through him?
Have to, eventually, eventually.
Do they start talking
I
about
mean,
91 indictments is not a path to the presidency?
I'm not sure. See, the other side of the coin about what Kiki was saying is she's saying it's an emotional, like, they're in a place. Trump voters, Republican voters in general, feel, whether this room groans or not, I don't care, that they've been lied to so many times by the media, big tech, big, that they're not going to listen to what, I'll say nicely, Walter Cronkite and mainstream media is going to tell them. They're off the reservation. So
Those are not influential voices to them.
they do not care.
Or judges. I mean, that's fair.
But my point is, they, from when we know the sins that we've been told with certainty, this is what America thinks, and people raise their hands, say, I don't know, and they get shouted down, they lose their job, and then 6 months later, it's like, oh yeah, we were totally wrong about that, but sorry. And so they're upset, and they're not going to listen to kind of what they're being told anymore, and that's a very frustrating part of the Trump narrative as someone who's trying to challenge that, which is it's hard to move people off that, because you sit there and say, he's got some problems. We got a conservative that really, does everything you want, and people are saying, no, I got to stick with my guy. Not because they can't get out of the box, because every time they try to, they get slapped back with, well, that wasn't right, that was wrong, this is a lie, this is a lie.
Why can't they transition to a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley?
Because no candidate has earned that trust and that
Right.
transition yet. And that's why we run these races, and
There's
that's
not
why
a ton of time left for them to actually make that case, right?
much,
Donald
about
Trump
like
is
4
not.
months.
Doesn't the people around Trump
this
tell
panel
me,
in 2011 would say, well, when President Gingrich is in the White House,
But I mean,
President
yes, but also
Santorum, here
very
we
different
go.
world with Donald
So
Trump.
I mean, I reject the time argument.
Because Trump
these
is
are
running
super-
as an incumbent, as you said earlier, right?
Yeah, he's essentially.
And we are October 24th, January 15th is the Iowa caucuses.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be maybe a debate. There's maybe 2 more debates before people start actually voting.
There's supposed to be
Donald Trump
7,
isn't.
but we'll see.
But before people start voting, Donald Trump is unlikely to get on the debate stage. It doesn't seem to have hurt him. How is Tim? When, and where, and how is Tim Scott going to be able to go through Donald Trump at that point? Nikki Haley has a harder time because she worked for him, as you said, and she, the thing she's leaning on is her foreign policy wins, which were his foreign policy wins, right? So it's hard to sell that to people.
Right.
I think you're right that Tim Scott's lack of a tether to Donald Trump helps him. But it's hard to see how someone with his personality, who's doing the Obama-Reagan model, goes through him without being on the same stage, being in the same room with him. How does that occur?
I think you said it best. Obama never felt the need to destroy Hillary, but he did have to take her out. So when I say go through, I'm not saying he's going to go point by point through the Trump record and get on the stage, but he just has to rip it out of Trump's hand. Just like in any primary, you got to go get it. And they don't give you this stuff. I mean, it's not the most powerful job in the world, and it's like, here's here. He's going to have to go rip it out of Trump's hand. But I think, to do that, you just have to get the credibility and the opportunity. Who would have guessed a month ago we would have a 2-front war in Israel? And that would totally
That's my point, yeah.
totally reset the board.
Where? It hasn't upended the GOP primary. It hasn't upended the general election. I mean, it's the same straight line vote. I mean, what has it upended?
It has upended the conversation.
Where?
All of a sudden, foreign policy.
So they have to answer some questions about loving Israel and standing behind Israel, which, I mean, is standard, and we all believe it. But how has it upended anything?
My point is that everyone's asking, how do you beat Trump? And what I'm saying is you can't predict.
But there's no one willing to stand up and saying, hey, 60 judges were right, and the election was, actually real.
Christie's saying it every day.
There's one guy, but you're talking about trying to have someone who can actually challenge him, a real candidate.
Because that's how you would think.
No, that's not how I would.
I think what Rob was saying
I
is
get
that
that.
the world
That's my
events
point.
happen.
That's
The
my
world
point.
events happen.
But it has not upended. It has upended neither race. The Republican primary.
We have a couple of questions. So we have one here. I saw you first stand up, please. It's a student, I think.
There's a student back there, Eugene.
There's one here and then one here.
There's a student back there.
Hit it.
I was just curious, just within this discussion, particularly to hear from the Republicans on the panel about Trump's approach to Israel. I know, we just said we're all, going to say we love Israel, stand behind Israel, but Trump has sort of
Smart.
With Israel, Ramaswamy has sort of implied in the debate that he would like to kind of pull support for Israel. So I think there might be more of a discussion within the Republican Party around that than we're sort of addressing. I would love to hear what you all think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in the White House for when we moved the embassy, and I certainly was involved in a lot of the conversations regarding Israel. I think Trump is very pro-Israel. He was our most pro-Israel president. I think what you see in his comments is very much Donald Trump. That everything is personal, and he wanted to lash out personally against Bibi. I don't think it's emblematic of greater policy. I think that's Donald Trump, and so I would assume, should he become president, he would go back to the exact same policies you'd seen before.
And it's unlikely that, Vivek is going to move any of the conversations as much as he has tried. We had one there standing up there. Yeah. You could stand up. I think it was you. You? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, jump up instead. Yes.
There's that New Yorker cartoon where the little child says to their dad, "When I grow up, I want to be an ex-president." Which speaks to this idea that your reputation as president gets better the longer time passes. This seems to be a strange example of that because both of the candidates have a record. Trump's got all those indictments which make it difficult to focus on the bits of his record that are not the subject of investigation by lawyers. Has he got a case to run on there? Because I understand most of what I missed some of what you said because the references came out so fast. But a lot of what you said seemed to be that what will win Trump the primary may not be the same thing that will win in the general election. He's not. He's a political animal that with some serious intelligence, and he's already won at least one election. So is there a massive change of strategy coming in the Trump campaign that we're not expecting, where he's already won the primary and then he suddenly becomes a far more serious politician and says, "My record." Is that a possible scenario?
Yeah, I'm going to try to answer that as the reporter who talks to these folks. No, it doesn't seem like that is the case. I think, his team would like to, right?
No.
I think I will say they have a more serious campaign than they did before. He also did a lot of work as president, putting his kind of people and fingers in the state parties. So his connection to the people who lead the state parties, which is really where it really matters, is there. So he doesn't feel the need to change. Also, you can't change Donald Trump. We over and over and over again, a lot of our colleagues went on television and said, this is the day that he changed and he became president. He was already president. He just looked, he's a different person. He's not gonna change. He's in his late 70s. All of our grandparents have not changed in decades. It is the exact opposite of human behavior to think he's going to change, especially when in 2016 he already won. That doesn't mean that his folks won't try to get him to do things. He also doesn't have kind of a North Star when it comes to policy, so feels like he can say whatever he wants on either side, right? He can be further left here on this issue while he's further right on this issue. Abortion is one which he's trying to do that currently. That was the argument for Pence, right? That he was going to be. That was the argument for Mike Pence.
I can guarantee the running mate doesn't change his mind.
It's just like no one can do it. I saw one more hand up back there. One more. We have one more back there, and we'll end here.
Hi, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on the overturning of Roe versus Wade that hasn't come up yet in your discussion. And I really agree with Kiki's comment about the thoughts that people, especially the Republican base and primaries, could actually get fed up with the Trump chaos. I know some evangelicals are still friends of mine. Hopefully you guys are still going to be friends in 2 days too. Still friends of mine in Iowa, and they're just refusing to support Trump anymore because of the chaos. But I also think it's because they see, okay, we went out, years and years hoping to get these conservative justices. That's now done. Our number one priority is now not there anymore. Roe v. Wade was overturned. So is the GOP base still going to come out?
Well, I don't know if it's about the GOP base as much as it even is about the Democratic base coming out. I think 2022 shows you that Roe v. Wade was a big issue. Nate Cohn, great kind of analytics guy, showed that, we've structurally, there was always an electoral advantage for Republicans in the last 2 cycles. And that's gone down to almost nothing now, about 0.7, and it's almost all Roe. And one of the things I would say is that I think what people don't kind of get about Roe is that, you know, in 2022, it was the first time we ever had candidates who went the extra step. We always had pro-life candidates, pro-choice candidates, people dealt with it. But we never had pro-life candidates who were against abortion in the cases of rape, incest, and the life of mother. And that was the norm, right? They tried to be the most extreme, and it exposed them to the point where they should have won, you know, the Senate, they didn't. They should have won the House by big margins, they didn't. Those people who gave Joe Biden a soft approval rating went for Democrats by 22 points. And there was a lot of Roe v. Wade involved in that. And I think you're going to see it again in 2024. And what I think is going to be unique about 2024 is that it's always been about the president. The midterm used to always be about the president, and for the first time since 1986, it wasn't about Joe Biden. It was about the Kerry Lakes of the world, and it was about these extreme Republican candidates. And it's going to be interesting, depending on in these battleground states where there are big U.S. Senate races, if the Republicans nominate extreme candidates, will they become, you know, just as much of the attention as the presidential? We've never really had that very often. And I'll say one last thing about the abortion issue, which I think is really important. When you are a candidate who are against abortions, even in the case of rape, incest, and the life of mother, all of a sudden your candidacy isn't just about Roe v. Wade. It is a signal to people that, wait, you may be extreme on other issues that make me uncomfortable. That's what we saw in 2022 in a lot of these U.S. Senate races. So it's more than just abortion. You are now tagged as like, oh, wait a minute, there must be a bunch of other issues that I don't agree with you on.
I'll just be quick because I know we're trying to wrap up. The abortion issue was a seismic shift. I'm going to talk just on the political seismic shift and not the issue itself. What I mean by that is it was something the Republicans have been working for 50 years, and suddenly we got it. Like the proverbial dog, things moved. One pro-life group lost $22 million in 1 year of funding because the people who cared about that issue said, we won, let's go fix other stuff. And, you know, and the first real test was the Kansas ballot initiative. We are outspent 27-1. We have been outspent on this issue because, if you know anything about advocacy and working with the American voters, the threat of losing something is much more motivating than gaining something. And so what we've seen, and I agree with a lot of points, is candidates to differentiate themselves in the Republican primary now have to turn the dial 2 degrees to the right because the Supreme Court moved the dial. And you're seeing even national candidates trying to figure out their messaging on life because it has changed fundamentally. Where the left's messaging is much more, we want to turn the dial back, and it's easier for their candidates to kind of move into that messaging set. So the Republican Party is grappling with how to handle that issue, and they have not done a good job, and I will agree that we have alienated some gettable voters because we haven't figured out how to talk about the issue in a way that isn't scary or creepy or alienating.
Maybe I'll be the girl who talks about abortion. First of all, let me say, I know I just thought I'd throw it out, it was so easy. First of all, let me say thanks for agreeing with me. I'll buy your dinner tonight. Secondly, I want to assure you that those of us who participate in Bradamus are friends, and it's because of Bradamus it helps us maintain a friendship. Because the one thing we all have in common is we love our country. And we do this work because we love our country. And we want our democracy to be strong. We disagree with how to get there sometimes. And we don't just duke it out on this panel. We duke it out over dinners. We duke it out over email.
There's wine there.
Yeah, sometimes you don't want to be there. But we have a lot of respect for one another, even in things we disagree on. So I want to assure people who are watching this that that's the case. It's not the case in our whole system. On the abortion thing, it's really important politically to understand you cannot overplay this in the hardcore campaigns. And both sides have a tendency to do that. But what it did do for those of us who support choice and a woman's right to choose and make that decision in the United States was it put the issue back in front of a generation of women who'd never had that choice taken away from them. Our mothers, and in the case of some of us who may be old enough to have remembered when it wasn't an option, had held the candle for many years, and women who were younger than us weren't involved in that campaign, and all of a sudden they woke up and realized that their health care was now restricted, their access to health care was restricted, and therefore their economic well-being and the choice to have their physical health under their own control, and frankly, the government's intervention, which for a long time has been a conservative point of view, that government should not play a role in their health care, is now going to play a role in our health care. I believe that is what has made the biggest dent. I'm not convinced yet that it will always be a winning political issue for us, and we have to be careful not to overplay it. We'll have a little water test on this in Virginia state and local elections in November, and we'll see how that plays out, and it'll be another political test on the issue.